Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Swedenborgian Online Community's Thursday broadcast. We hope that you're doing well today. We are your affirming, loving, interfaith Swedenborgian community, hoping to uplift each other, ourselves, wherever we're at spiritually and physically. So welcome, and we might as well get right down to it because today we have a marvelous guest. If I do say so myself, Dr. Paige Morahan, who's been a mentor to me, a longtime participant with this online community, a lay leader. Greetings, Paige. Thank you so much for coming on.
I'm delighted to be here, and this topic is one that is dear to my heart. Tonight, I think we want to focus on race relations and racial privilege that some of us have that we may not realize we have, and to share my journey. That's the major thing that I wanted to do.
Fantastic.
To have us start, I'm trying to see my picture now. I thought I would see it when I was talking, but I'm not seeing it. So let me.
We have to have a lot of windows up with this
right.
online community business.
So what I wanted to show everyone. I first would like to start with a prayer that was written by Jane Siebert, our president of our denomination, and it was for this book, United Against Racism, which is a compilation put together for the National Council of Churches in the USA, Christian churches, and it's a group that we're part of, Convention is part of, and it includes I think over 40 Christian denominations in the United States, Baptist, Episcopal, Congregational, etc. And I'm really very pleased that we're a denomination that's part of this group that has made a specific case united against racism.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So let's start with this prayer of Jane's. To you who listens to our hearts, knows us, loves us equally, and created us to live in harmony, we say thank you. We need your help this day and forevermore. We need your help to envision a world of racial equity, where all have what they need for health, education, justice, and family support. For we must first be able to imagine it to make it so. Help us all to want this and work for this with all our heart and all our soul and all our might. May it be so. We need your help to open our individual eyes to the part we each play in our blindness to what is and what isn't. Help us to identify our own wrongs so that we can work to make them right. May it be so. We need your help to learn over and over how to love you as you taught us to love with open hearts, open minds, and open arms. Help us to see you in every person, hear you in every plea, feel you in every possibility. May it be so. May this be our individual prayer as well as our collective prayer, for it takes all of us every minute of every day, never looking away, always looking within. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Paige. And thank you, Reverend Jane Siebert, for that prayer. It's wonderful. She's, as the president of our denomination, the Swedenborgian Church of North America, she has done a tremendous job, bringing us into that dialogue and that important work. So that's wonderful. And it's great that so many different Christian denominations, it sounds like, have come together to produce such a book.
Yes, and there are prayers from many people, many ministers in the various churches. Just to give you the rationale, it is to awaken, confront, and transform our churches and nation into becoming a nation united as one when it comes to standing against racism, and for Christians to experience and embody an inclusive and beloved community. This is what we mean by authentic Christianity. Without hesitation, we assert that racism is a sin that continues to tear the fabric of the United States of America. Though other places in the world struggle with discrimination, biases, and government-sponsored injustices, our focus on where we do ministry, this is our watch here in the United States. And the faith walk is not just the right thing to do, it's the core of who and what we're called to be, authentic, faithful followers of Jesus. So that's the call of the National Council of the Churches in the USA. So,
Well, that's beautiful, and I'm
and
sure
we're part of this. Yeah,
that's great that we are.
yeah.
I'm sure many other religious institutions feel the same way, and I'm curious, Paige, how you came to this work, and maybe how you came to your spirituality that you so lovingly share with us from time to time.
Yeah, this is a journey of mine to become a true white ally, and I'm still in a work in progress. So definitely for all of us whites. I grew up in the South before we had integration. I graduated in 1957 from high school, so it was before integration started. So this journey really started after that. One of the key points was living in New York City, and I worked at Rockefeller Institute as a laboratory technician and realized that there were only 2 of us out of a group of about 20. They were mostly all women technicians in those days, who were more than second generation United States citizens. So I really got a big dose of diversity, and we explored ethnic restaurants and ethnic festivals. New York was full of those in those days, and so I certainly became aware that there's a lot more than the white South that I had grown up with. Then when I became a faculty member at Virginia Commonwealth University, I rehabbed a historic house in what was known as Historic Church Hill in Richmond, Virginia. It's called Historic Church Hill because that's where Patrick Henry gave his famous "Give me liberty or death" speech in the St. John's Episcopal Church. And the neighborhood was primarily Black, African American, and next to me was an African American house that stayed African American the whole time I was there. And so we really tried to be good neighbors to each other. And so that was another way of getting some understanding. But I really began being more aware in my 40s, 50s, 60s. The part of it was when I moved to Philadelphia, I became a member, and I'm still a member, of the First United Methodist Church of Germantown, which we call FUMCOG, since First United Methodist Church of Germantown is a long name. And this is a liberal Methodist church. We were quite active in the civil rights movement, and at the time I joined, the pastor at that time was one of the key people in the civil rights movement. We also did a year of study and became a reconciling congregation, and there's still not too many of those in the Methodist Church.
That's great.
We're not sure what we're going to do now with the vote in the Methodist National Methodist Church. They're looking at what they're going to do and whether they may have a new vote, and some churches may leave, and so we aren't sure what we're going to do.
Yeah, the recent vote, could you tell us what that vote was about?
it was a vote that was engineered by conservative Methodists to be against, to really go backwards in some areas, particularly for gay marriage and all of that. And
Oh, yeah.
so I
Quite unfortunate.
don't know the particulars. I just know that it's in the background, and we're not acting precipitously, but we are considering what to do. We're also a church that has long, was one of the first to be a sanctuary church, and we're being a sanctuary now for a family that would be deported if they left the church, if the parents left the church.
Oh, wow.
We are against the death penalty, so it has a long, proud history of social justice. And it has had a long commitment to learning about racism. I went through some workshops that the Methodist Church, our Eastern Pennsylvania Synod, put on, called Healing the Wounds of Racism, to really educate whites about, like, I had no idea. I'm proud to have been born a Virginian, to learning about the laws that were passed during a period of 100 years that ended up with African Americans being viewed as less than citizens, less than people.
Wow. Jim Crow laws and rounding up laws.
This was before the Revolutionary War.
Oh.
This is very early, because initially the African Americans and the indentured servants were viewed fairly similarly.
Mm-hmm.
And you could work your freedom, but then that changed.
Yeah, they often commingled the indentured servants, the white indentured servants, and the slaves, right. And then eventually they started creating laws based on skin color, and then that kind of drove a wedge between
exactly. Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. So divide and conquer.
Yeah. And it's easy to tell, if all black people are slaves, it's easy to tell who's the runaway if you can just look at the color. But if they had help from white indentured servants, it made it a lot tougher, and it's harder to identify them. Right.
So it was hard to learn those facts, which I was certainly never taught in history growing up in my, my 16 years of, grade 1 to senior in high school. Was never taught any of this. So it was just, brand new. And of course, very, very troubling to learn. And so we've had a long history of being involved. Let's see, the Methodist Church, to its credit, required this course, the first level workshop, for all aspiring ministers.
Oh, that's great.
So, and I think it still does in a different form. And so I went on to take other workshops, and both they had several levels with the Methodist Church that I took, and also with a group associated with the Quakers called Training for Change. And there was one very powerful one there that I took that was brought in class. And my family certainly was not wealthy by any means. However, I realized that because both my parents had graduated from college, that put me in a whole different class from most everyone else in the group, they were mixed. There were many people who were more wealthy than I was, background, but because of that. So, so the intersectionality of race and gender and class has become of interest to me, and even more so so that's kind of the Methodist Church aspect that I've had. The other aspect of learning was designing a leadership program to advance women to senior positions in medical, dental, and public health schools. It's almost 25 years old, and if you want to find out any more about it, just Google ELAM for Executive Leadership in Academic Medicine, and the program will come up.
That's great.
And what I learned, we had a commitment to always have diversity in the class, and we also had a commitment to have a day of programming, which I have to say, even 25 years later, as far as I know, we're the only program in academic medicine that has a full day of programming on diversity and inclusion.
Wow, that's incredible.
Leadership program.
Really?
Yeah, formal
The only
program.
one.
Yeah.
Hmm.
There are workshops, schools have workshops, and certainly it's become much more common, but as a leadership program.
Sure. Yeah.
We now do an experiential process that's very powerful, and I won't go into that here. But the point is that I became sensitized that I could never know all the issues that the women of color fellows had to go through when I was, designing the program, doing the curriculum. And I co-taught the curriculum with a fantastic woman, Dr. Jeanette Southpaw, who is chairman of family medicine at the University of Pittsburgh. And she and I taught it for about 5 years. That, as I said, I can never know all the issues that a woman of color has to go through in addition. So while I can empathize that we're both women and thus are disadvantaged in a male-dominated medical school environment, which is still very male-dominated, I don't have the Black component, the dual component. So that was important knowledge for me to understand. And that, I think, and then it continued with, I had the opportunity to start an international leadership program and to get to know people from over 40 countries, mostly what we call developing, although in many cases they're more developed than we are in community medicine and other things like that. Just learning the variety of the world, sort of like when I moved to New York, just that, and that we're very much alike in many ways, all being health professions educators, and then there are these differences that bring so much richness to our lives. So I feel, honored to have been able to be part of both of these programs.
Yeah, quite the blessing.
Yeah. So, and then finally, in my journey, in my own family, I have a brother-in-law who's Ethiopian. Came over to the U.S. From being would have been caught up in the war in Ethiopia if he had not come over as a teenager. And then I have two god-grandchildren who I don't like the term biracial because there isn't any biological race aspect. But I do have two that are, so I know some of the issues that they deal with. So, and both of them are young men, and again have the issues that any young Black man has in the United States.
But quite heavy issues.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think that just does part of my, up to recent years. And what I'd like for us to do, as I said, I'm an educator, and I know that Cory put a link in Chatsy so everyone can pull it up. And one of the...
it's also on our homepage.
Right. And one of the items in there is a little template I put together about 12 common privileges that are mostly unearned that we have in the United States today. And I'd love to have you all who are with us, Albert and Mark and Alyssa, to answer those and tell me how many you have. Does everyone have it up, or shall I go through? Would it be?
I can pull it up for the audience.
Okay, that might be nice to do. Yeah, I'm wondering, Albert, Mark, and Alyssa, do you have it up, or shall I say what each of the 12 are and ask you to say yes or no?
How about we go through each one, and you and I can answer, and
okay,
those.
Okay. And you'll put it up as well. Okay.
Yep.
Yes, I see it. I see it up. Okay.
Okay.
So the first four are related to cultural background. So in race and ethnicity, if you're white, check off that. And if you're not, you don't.
Well, although it may be a backwards term, I am of mixed race, so I guess I wouldn't be considered
you
white
would not,
because I'm not entirely white.
Right. So you would not check that, and I do. Okay.
Okay.
Then the second is nationality citizenship. If you were born in the U.S. Or Canada, check number 2.
Check.
Okay. So at the moment, you have 1 and I have 2. Then talk about first language. If you're a native English speaker, check the 3rd one.
Check.
So we're
you
now
as well.
2 and 3. Religion. If you're Christian, check that.
Yeah.
So I think
Interfaith
probably
Christian.
all of us in this group probably get that one. Then the next 4 are related to personal identity. What's your physical sex, or sometimes called your assigned gender? I'm female.
I am male.
Okay. So,
I will note that Black American men have a tremendous lockup rate, right? And Black male bodies tend to be viewed as criminals without committing any crime, and so and unfortunately, sometimes being a Black male doesn't necessarily relate to much of a privilege over playing a Black woman in certain types of situations.
Yeah. Although generally being a male, I will say there's been no Black woman who's been dean of a majority medical school.
Wow.
And there have been 2 Black men at least who have been.
Yeah, and
so that's where
Black women have it.
That's where the male comes in. So you would give yourself a check for that.
Well, it's interesting. I find it's interesting, these identities, and you mentioned sex relates to personal identity. So could you mention how like personal identity around like trans male or trans men or trans women would
that's the next one. That's number 6. That's gender identity. We're called cisgender if we're the same as our physical sex. So I'm a cisgender female. And
I'm cisgender.
But there can be, many other varieties of that, and in which case you would not check that. And then 7 is sexual orientation. And in the United States, heterosexual is advantaged, is privileged.
Indeed.
And any other kind of orientation is not. And then the final 5 relate to kind of health and resources. And you'll see that so far there's no way that we could influence any of those. These are kind of where we're born, at least when we're children. As adults, you can change your gender identity, so it's kind of where God put us on this earth, is whether we have privilege or not. The next 5 are still pretty much that way. Number 8 is our physical ability. And are you currently abled? Now, I'm not completely able, so I would not check that.
Yeah.
Then there, yeah, and then there is kind of brain or mental ability. We're now using the term neurotypical, which is your brain developed the same way as a majority of others. But we're now calling kind of, I forget what the term is. It's not abnormal, but non-typical would be like on the autism spectrum or sometimes ADHD. And I'm neurotypical, so I would check that.
So kind of outside the middle of the bell curve of brain types.
Then number 10 is age. And in the United States, children are not privileged and elders are not privileged.
Yeah, that's so true.
Maybe different in certain Asian countries, but not. So if you're between 25 and 65, you have an advantage.
Yeah, and I would have a check there.
Right. And I don't.
Congratulations, although not on that exact fact.
And then 11 comes to socioeconomic class, middle or upper class. And 12 is education, college educated. You would check that. And really, the education is the only one that we have some of this whole list of 12 that we have some control over, but we really don't have that much control when we're young, going to primary school or high school, because depending on what socioeconomic class we're born in, we might go to a better school.
Yeah, and if we're locked up, it's hard to go to college too.
Right. So I ended up with 9 of those privileges. So
yeah, I was pretty
have
high
9
as well. 10.
Ah.
11. 10.
Well, yeah, 10 because you don't have the race and
not the race and not the socioeconomic class. Although now,
right.
I don't know if I'd be considered middle class. I'm gonna check my pay stubs.
Well, you're probably in between. So yeah, it's 10 or 11. And
but, growing up, my mother was quite poor and still doesn't have a car, renting. So yeah.
Yeah. So Albert says he has 8. And Mark and Alyssa, where are you all? If you would care to disclose.
Well, okay, so we can lament our underprivilegedness or our privileges either way. But how would you say, taking a good look at our privileges, and you mentioned these are mostly unearned, how does that help inform our walk in the world?
Right.
Yeah.
This is where I go back to the metaphor of Peggy McIntosh, who called this our backpack of privilege. She usually does it for white privilege. We have privileges that we carry around on our back that we don't realize we have, but everyone around us realizes that we have them. And so that we can walk through the world oblivious, and people that don't have our privileges are always having to tiptoe around us, perhaps, because of where the power and privilege comes in, depending on whether you have additional power as well as privilege.
Good point. Yeah, good points.
So this is where I think it's important to realize that not everyone has that kind of privilege. I think it comes up often when people say, I made it on my own. I'm a self-made person.
Pick myself up by the bootstraps.
Right. And when you look at this, again, these are largely unearned. It's where you have God happened to have you be put on this earth.
Well, in a relative sense, you and I are quite privileged. And so how do folks like us reflect on this in any real way? And I think you sharing your journey helps inform that answer as well. But I'm curious, like what can we bring to the table in a dialogue like this?
To become aware, that's the very and to feel gratitude that we have these, not that we're better than,
No.
but really feeling gratitude to God that we have these privileges, and then how can we help those who do not. This is the part of becoming a white ally in the sense that we're looking at it. There are two other metaphors I'd like to bring out to think about this. One is, don't know whether anyone here has done the privilege walk. We've sometimes done it in Elam. A privilege walk, you stand in a line, everyone in the group, and then it says, are you white? And you would take a step forward. And if you aren't white, you stay where you are. Or I think you might take a step back. Then it would go down the list of 12, and it might ask other related questions. And you see at the end how far ahead are some people in the group and other people not. In one of our leadership programs, we did this, and we had some people at the front, and we had in the back a person of color who was born outside the United States to a very impoverished condition and also had a disability. And when you see that visibly, you really see that with your privilege, it's like we are carrying an automatic handicap. I mean, that we're given a handicap as you would be given in golf.
Yeah. Sometimes it's huge, right?
Right. And we don't realize that. So that's
often. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, maybe it speaks too directly to the point. Often it's our voices being heard, and that person in the very back. That's the voice that we often kind of steamroll, or they don't have the confidence or support to speak up.
Right. Exactly.
Worrying about the situation of their life often as well.
Yeah. They may be down in the, Maslow's category of needs of basic food and shelter.
Yeah.
And not at the other, at the area where we are in self-actualization. So that's another. So one way to look at it is it's a backpack we have of privileges that we carry around with us that we don't see, but everyone around us does. Another one is to do something like this walk and to see that you've been given a handicap. I mean, I forget what the term is because I don't play golf, but you've been.
I think that's right. I don't know.
so that you can start at an even place, and we don't often do that with people who don't have these privileges.
If you play golf, that's a privilege too. You should add a 13.
Right. And see, when people say, I didn't have that privilege when I grew up, but you really did. You had, 10 of these, perhaps, that other people didn't have. So shouldn't we give other people that handicap advantage to even the playing field? And that's part of what affirmative action is about. Is realizing that. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Another metaphor. There's a paper out called The Gardener's Tale. And it's about two pots on someone's front stoop in like Baltimore. And someone comes, buys a house and puts seeds in both of those. Well, person didn't know it, but one, the left-hand side had good soil and the right-hand side did not. So the left-hand side, the flowers grew beautifully, but they didn't in the right. And that we don't realize the effect of that handicap, that not having that advantage.
Yeah, it would blow our minds if we were to come to understand a little bit of, how far privilege often takes us versus those who don't have it.
Right. This is an area that often intrigues me in politics, and I won't get into politics much, but where politicians say I'm self-made, and there was a presidential nominee a few years ago, not the current one, who's very proud and saying, he's got to be a millionaire on his own, when his family had gone to Mexico in some situation that occurred in the U.S., and the U.S. repatriated those people using government funds. So his family had that advantage. Maybe it was 2 generations before him. But, if they hadn't had that government support, they wouldn't have been where his family wouldn't be where they were.
Yeah,
so
and there's probably untold number of privileges for that individual like that.
So, we don't think about other privileges. So that was kind of what I wanted to lead with, is talking about privilege. This is the systemic racism, or what I call our racialized society that we live in. Because there's so many systems that are made that advantage people for totally unearned reasons. It's just the luck of wherever God set us down on earth.
Or in other words, often disadvantage people for totally unearned disadvantages. In a sense.
Right. Yeah. And so I think that's something that we need to realize. And then as people who have more privileges than others, how can we better help?
Yeah, so you mentioned affirmative action and kind of generally around supporting people, and you're pointing it out now. It's so huge to think about that actively as we go throughout our lives, right? And look for ways to uplift others, because it's not cookie cutter. It could just be allowing someone to speak that needs some space created so that they can, and things like that.
Right. This, I think, let's see whether I can share my screen. Let's see. I think I need to do it big. Share the screen. Share the screen. I think
share your screen. Yeah.
No,
Did you click the share at the bottom?
Yeah, I just was clicking on the right one. Oh, so can everyone see well, I know that people in Chatsy cannot, but I'll go through these. What I'm sharing here is from a resource called the Anti-Racist Organizational Development, which comes from Dismantling Racism Project by the Western State Center, and it is available free on the if you Google it. So if you Google Dismantling Racism Project Western State Center, you will get this. And this is from that. And these are characteristics of anti-racist white allies. So one thing that is hard for whites to accept, and it's taken me a long time, is that I am racist because I live in a racist society, a racialized society, systemic racism. So there's no way I can avoid it because it's what I grew up in. So that's the first point. All white people are racist. I am a racist.
So you're saying that unless we change the structures in society,
That's right.
those who kind of have those structures work for them are inherently
Mhm.
kind of biased or racist as part of
Right,
the
right,
system.
right. Because it's the water you swim in. You don't know it. Okay. And the second point is related. I'll never know what it's like to be a person of color in this country. While it's important to build empathy, I need to acknowledge that I cannot know what it's really like. And the third, to expect to be uncomfortable as a white anti-racist ally. And discomfort offers an opportunity for reflection and deeper understanding. For instance, I was called out once for wearing African garb that I had been given by friends in my international program, that I was appropriating ethnic art. And I know the people who gave me those clothes had no difficulty, however other people do. So I do not wear those caftans outside now. I wear them in my home. So that's the type of thing I'm talking about. Another time I nominated a Black African-American woman whom I admired for something, but I did not check it out with the African-Americans in the committee. I did the usual white thing. We just have a good idea and we act on it. And it got me into a lot of trouble, and rightfully so. So that's
Wow.
part of, opportunity for learning.
Thank you for sharing that page.
Then the fourth one is I can love myself even though I'm a racist because I've made a commitment to fight my own racism and racism in the larger society. And that is I expect to make mistakes, learn from them, and I'm compassionate to myself and others as I make this journey. There's a book that's recently been written called White Fragility, and this speaks to that we have to move beyond being so fragile that we cannot stand to understand that we are racist.
In a way, this speaks to something that we often talk about here with the Swedenborgian Online Community, which is often we don't always work out of the highest good or our most altruistic self. Often we're centered on ourselves for selfish reasons, centered on things that are destructive or not the best, kind of not serving others. And yet, being willing to see that, and that we have some gray parts of our hearts that we're working on and hopefully allowing divinity to work with, is actually a big step for transformation, in order to have transformation in our hearts so we're not as defensive, and also transformation in the world around us so that we're willing to see where we should grow and change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Somehow I've lost my lost the sheet right now.
I can still see it. Do you want me to read the next one?
Yes, would you please? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Despite my best intentions, I will still act out racism, and people of color may have reason to be angry with me. I will not die from anger or criticism. In fact, I will grow and become stronger.
Yeah. There's another metaphor that fits these two points that I learned in one of the workshops I took, to view working with African Americans and whites together, that it's like learning to ice skate, and we're definitely going to fall down. And that we need to just help each other get back up and try again. And that was a very helpful metaphor that I often say to myself. And that comes down to the next one. When people of color criticize what I say or do, I'll accept it as useful information to help me in my learning without always having to explain to them why I said what I said and did or what I did. And that's the important, it's been important for me to understand that intentions don't, don't make up for the action. I do not expect or want to be absolved from my racism by people of color. Too often we really want people of color to forgive us, and that's not their job. It has to be our own commitment to fight racism without needing the commitment to be acknowledged by others. And then finally, the last two, to be open to questioning my assumptions and to be part of an anti-racist freedom movement. And that's why I am so grateful for my Methodist Church, that I have a place that I can go to do that work. Because it does take being in a community of support. So that's kind of attitudes and behaviors. And then the next page in that Dismantling Racism book is moving from concern to action. And so the first part is to educate ourselves, and I've certainly done that. Reflecting on my own childhood and upbringing. And as I said, this was the water that I swam in and still do. I live in a very white, enclave in the suburbs. Moving down to this, won't go over all this list, but as I can, I certainly try to eliminate use of language and the light and dark imagery, to say that dark can be beautiful. To disagree with racist comments, jokes, and references when I hear them. I do remember a professional occasion when we were talking about this was dealing with the ELAM program and talking about what to do in some aspect of the diversity and inclusion. And it was all whites around the table. And I said, I think we need to get some people of color to look at this as well. So that's
yeah. And your point there, around speaking up when there's comments that are racist and things like that, that's so important, because we see where that goes, where we're not used to speaking up against unrighteousness. And you can have entire countries do really heinous things when no one's standing up for the oppressed.
Yeah, a number of people say that silence of liberals is more hurtful than than active racism often. So, and then so these are various for those of you that will be able to see this screen. There's some more ideas. Support political candidates committed to racial justice. And so I'm part of trying to do those 2-minute political activist activities. One I really like that comes out every week is to send a thank you to someone that has done something, a postcard. They give you the addresses you can send. And we don't think about thanking people enough for stands they've taken.
Good point.
Contributed financially to an organization. I do a fair amount of in my retirement investing in microfinance to support organizations that support women advancing in education around the world. And certainly buying habits, I do think about that as well, buying habits. So I think we'll kind of leave that there. But just to have an idea of just those are actions that we all can think about taking. I know that we're getting close to an hour, so I wanted to check and see if there's anything
In the Chatsy.
Yeah, the Chatsy doesn't look like it.
Also, I'll
If
just mention,
mhm,
if you don't mind, that
mhm.
you all in the Chatsy, thank you for participating and answering a few of Paige's questions and some of the reflection there. It's nice to be connected with you this evening. And yeah,
And
that's all I wanted to
if you
say.
have any more questions, please ask them, and we'll see if we can answer. Um, there is more work that I'm doing with my Methodist church. We are in the process of doing a racial audit, which comes from this anti-racist organizational development project. And we're just at the stage of beginning to tabulate the results. And I'd love to talk about that at some point
Hmm.
to tell you about that. And I've taken a couple of online courses. What I wanted to end up with, though, is let's get back to convention for a minute. And can you put up the statement that we're going to vote on in
Yeah, so
in June? Because
from our denomination.
right, from our denomination. And I think I'll read this. It's up on the screen, and I think you all in Chatsy have it. But I am just so proud of our church, our denomination, being reaffirming this statement resolution that we'll vote on this summer. And it goes, as Swedenborgians, we affirm the core truths of our faith that honor the diversity of both heaven and earth, and recognize that loving people who are different from us is integral to the practice of a religious life. We also acknowledge that broad generalizations of races, nations, genders, sexual orientations, physical abilities, and religions can be found in our sacred text when interpreted literally, and that these texts have been used on occasion to promote opinions that run counter to these core truths. We hereby affirm our responsibility to interpret our text in the light of love and inclusion, in heaven's light, and categorically reject interpretations of the Bible or of Swedenborg's writings that promote a discriminatory viewpoint. Where any translation or interpretation appears to invite the reader to engage in exclusionary or hateful thinking, promote stereotypes, or justify discrimination against anyone for any reason, regardless of the source, we stand against this. If any member, clergy, employee, or other affiliated person indicates by word, deed, works, writing, affiliations, or any other means racism, anti-Semitism, anti-Muslim bigotry, gender bias, heterosexism, ableism, or any other expression of prejudice, they do not reflect nor represent the practical doctrine of the Swedenborgian Church. We encourage one another to advocate for those who face discrimination and to address these expressions of bias in our personal interactions and in the larger society. We also acknowledge that forms of discrimination come in many subtle shades, and that we have a responsibility to regularly investigate our actions and beliefs, both individually and collectively, to align them with these truths so that we can be better vessels, greater vessels for divine love in the world.
Wow,
And
it's quite the statement.
yeah, so I'm very proud of our church in having a statement like that. And I think I know that there is a group that's working on looking at some of the writings of Swedenborg that are often interpreted in a bigoted way. And
Yeah,
so I
great.
think some of that will be coming out in convention as well.
Well, I do notice
Keep
that,
posted. Yeah.
it's kind of a trend of, I will keep posted, that's exciting. It's kind of a trend of Swedenborg to, when he's talking about a specific individual or group, to stereotype it broadly, at least in the way he words it in our translations. But then when he finds another group of the same religion or what have you, he'll generalize that, and it could be very different. And often I find his language is always just such a kind of a broad, stroking language. And reading him, you realize, oh, he's actually meaning just a specific person or what have you. But it's unfortunate often. Of course, we have the other side of Swedenborg's writings, which is his repeated emphasis, as the statement mentions, on the diversity of heaven and how people of all faiths, all traditions are in heaven. And it takes someone who really wants to create a hell, loves their hell, for them to be in hell, not the labelism that we often see in religious institutions. So that'll be an interesting dialogue once their findings come out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I look forward to being part of that effort in the summer. To close up, there's another prayer in the United Against Racism book that I think is interesting, and for those of us who are old fogies to think about it, it's called a millennial lament. And I wondered whether we might want to close with that.
Oh, yeah.
Please.
Thank you.
This is from Tanya Boschiaut at Virginia Commonwealth University. Oh God, we millennials are angry, hurt, and in dismay. We've discovered that generations before us lied about this land being the home of the free and the land of the brave. They told us we lived in a post-society, post-racist, post-sexist, post-classist. Yet many refuse to see our young Black bodies slain by the police. Yet many refuse to see our schools' funding are still segregated. We are, yet we are ignored and silenced by the church. What is jarring to our souls is this intergenerational divide of racism. It didn't start with us. Where did it come from? How did it seep into our collective consciousness? A legacy and a culture of hate. We get it. We wonder, how do we fix a broken system we didn't create? And it still hurts. The fragility of our humanity causes us to mourn as products of a racist society we did not architect. But the day is a new day, a day where we hold everyone accountable. We're calling everyone to the carpet. But thank you, oh God, the winds are changing. You're prophesizing to a different generation. Like in Acts, we're prophesizing and seeing visions. Our dreams are different. Our goals are different. Our visions are different. Visions of a better tomorrow. Visions of racial equality. We have that Black girl magic and Black boy joy. Lord, we millennials feel the winds are changing. Thanks be to you, O God, the God of our ancestors and older generations. We're recognizing the winds are changing. Amen.
May that be so. Amen. Wow. Thank you, Paige, so much. Thank you, Dr. Morahan, for coming on and sharing your experience and your work and others' work as well. It's quite meaningful and important that we keep dialogue open around these lines.
Okay.
And thank you all for joining us. Sorry, Paige. Please go ahead.
No, I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity. And it forced me to put some things together. And if the group wants to hear any more, I've got some more things to share with what we're doing in our Methodist Church. So,
well, fantastic.
Thank you all.
And to the extent you all want to join in on the conversation, maybe in the future we can open up this Zoom interaction to a few other faces. We can hear your thoughts. Sometimes we rub elbows. It's nice to be in community and in conversation.
That would be wonderful. That'd be wonderful.
Wouldn't that be cool? Yeah, Paige, I gotta say, Paige is one of our best supporters as far as I'm concerned. I hope you all support us. But one of the most inspiring folks in my life as a mentor for me through seminary, as someone who has uplifted this community over the years in many ways. And I open up the floor for your volunteerism as well. If you want to share a topic that you are passionate about, if you want to join in on a conversation like this, please reach out. And also be sure to subscribe, like, what have you, wherever you find us, whether it be on Android, iTunes, YouTube, Facebook, or Instagram. Thank you for connecting with us, and go forth knowing that you are quite loved. Bye.
Good night.